Hello! Welcome to English for Shared. Here, you learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's go!
NICOLAS Maduro, the true biography of a dictator. NICOLAS Maduro is one of the most controversial figures in contemporary world politics. The current president of Venezuela and successor to Hugo Chavez, his image divides opinions both within and outside the country. For some, he represents the continuation of so-called Bolivarian socialism. For others, he is a dictator responsible for plunging Venezuela into one of the worst humanitarian crises in Latin America. His life trajectory is marked by a surprising rise from bus driver to head of state through union positions and international diplomacy. Maduro's story cannot be told solely by the power he attained, but also by the context in which his life unfolded. He grew up in a Venezuela already facing social inequality, political crises, and ideological disputes. From an early age, he was influenced by ideas of militancy, trade unionism, and class struggle, elements that shaped his political identity. Although his academic background was limited, he knew how to use his loyalty and popular discourse to gain ground. The turning point in his career came with his close relationship with Hugo Chavez. Charismatic and revolutionary, Chavez saw in Maduro not a great strategist, but a loyal and disciplined ally capable of defending the Bolivarian project even under the most difficult circumstances. This bond of trust ultimately made Maduro the chosen heir over other, stronger figures within Chavismo. With Chavez's death, Maduro inherited not only the presidency, but also a divided country on the brink of economic collapse. Since then, his tenure in power has been marked by allegations of electoral fraud, repression of the opposition, international sanctions, and even accusations of drug trafficking by the United States government. Despite external pressure and internal discontent, he remains firmly in power, sustained by military alliances and strategic international support. To understand the life of Nicolás Maduro is to understand how a man of humble origins rose to the pinnacle of power, becoming one of the most controversial figures in recent Latin American history. The humble childhood. Nicolás Maduro Moros was born in November 23, 1962, in Caracas, the capital of Venezuela. His home was simple, marked by the constant struggle to survive amid the hardships of the time. His family belonged to the lower middle class and lived modestly, without great privileges, but also without extreme poverty. This environment helped Maduro grow up close to the reality of ordinary Venezuelans, something he would later use in his political rhetoric. His father, Nicolás Maduro Garcia, was a unionist teacher, known for his left-wing political ideas and his defense of workers' rights. His mother, Teresa de Jesus Moros, was a housewife, dedicated to her family and caring for her children. This relationship with a father involved in unionism and a loving mother gave Maduro a worldview in which the struggle for equality and the valorization of popular roots were constant themes. Maduro attended public schools, but never stood out as a brilliant student. In fact, he struggled with formal studies and never completed high school the traditional way. Many critics, years later, would use this detail to question his intellectual capacity to govern a country. Despite this, from a young age, he showed more interest in political conversations and the daily lives of workers than in school subjects. While many of his peers dreamed of university careers or technical professions, Maduro seemed more inclined toward activism and union life. He closely observed the political discussions his father brought home, and as a teenager, already participated in conversations about social inequality, labor exploitation, and popular struggles. This early interest wouldn't be enough to transform him into an immediate political leader, but it planted the seeds for his future trajectory. Maduro's youth was marked by a simple life, without great luxuries, but with a strong sense of community. He learned early on to value community ties, solidarity among neighbors, and the importance of unity in times of difficulty. These experiences would be constantly recalled in his speeches, in which he presented himself as someone who came from the people and lived like the people. Despite his humble origins, Nicolás Maduro harbored a quiet ambition. He didn't show early on that he wanted to be president, but he had a desire to participate, to be heard, to be involved in something bigger than his family life. This personality trait would be decisive in the following years, when the young Venezuelan would go from being just another ordinary worker to becoming part of the labor movement and later the national political scene. The young driver and trade unionist. In his youth, Maduro began working as a bus driver in Caracas, a profession he would pursue for several years. This experience brought him even closer to the reality of working people, those who spent hours braving the capital's chaotic traffic to provide for their families. The bus driver would be his first political platform, as he spoke with passengers and colleagues about politics, social injustices, and the hardships of everyday life. It was in this environment that Maduro discovered his true calling, union leadership. He became active in the Caracas Drivers Union, advocating for better wages, working conditions, and basic rights for the workers. His ability to mobilize his colleagues and speak clearly about the needs of the people earned him respect and a place in the Union community. He was a leader who emerged from the streets using direct and accessible language, unlike traditional politicians. In the 1980s, Maduro delved even deeper into the world of activism. He became close to left-wing groups and participated in intense ideological debates, seeking alternatives to the prevailing capitalist model. During this period, he even traveled to Cuba, where he received political training in the Cuban Communist Party. This experience would prove crucial, as it was there that he learned about the more structured socialist ideology, Fidel Castro's revolutionary ideals, and the defense of the anti-imperialist struggle. This contact with Cuba not only influenced him ideologically, but also opened doors for future political alliances. Maduro began to see socialism as an inevitable path for Venezuela and committed to following that path. Among his fellow drivers, his image grew. He was not just a union leader who complained about problems, but someone who studied, informed himself, and offered solutions inspired by revolutionary models. Little by little, Maduro went from being just the bus driver to a recognized activist. His simple oratory, humble origins, and firm stance helped him gain respect in union and political circles. He spoke the same language as the people, without formalities, which led many workers to identify with him. This characteristic would be one of the greatest assets of his political career. Trade unionism was therefore Nicolas Maduro's greatest school. It was in this space that he learned to negotiate, speak in public, organize protests, and confront opponents. It was also during this period that he began to connect with broader movements of the Venezuelan left, which would pave the way for his future ties with Hugo Chavez and the definitive entry into the country's political life. The approach to Hugo Chavez in the 1990s. Venezuela was experiencing turbulent times. The economy was weakening, social inequality was increasing, and the population was increasingly dissatisfied with the traditional political parties. It was in this context that the figure of Hugo Chavez, a charismatic military man who, in 1992, attempted a coup against the then government. Although the coup failed, Chavez gained national notoriety, especially among the poorest sectors, who saw in him a hope for change. Maduro, who was already a union activist and close to left-wing groups, became close to the political movement led by Chavez. When the former military man was released from prison and officially launched the Fifth Republic movement, Maduro not only joined the group, but also distinguished himself as a loyal follower. He saw in Chavez the embodiment of the ideas he had always admired: a leader from below, challenging the elites, and promising to transform Venezuela into a more just country. Over time, Maduro established himself as one of the faces of the nascent Chavismo. He actively participated in the political campaigns that led Chavez to victory in the 1998 elections, when the former military man assumed the presidency. This was a milestone, not only for the country, but also for Maduro, who, from then on, would gain increasing prominence within the new government. His loyalty to the leader would be rewarded with strategic political positions. First, Maduro was elected deputy for Fifth Republic movement. In parliament, he stood out as an uncompromising defender of Chavez's proposals and a fierce critic of the opposition. His skill lay not in grand ideas or innovative projects, but in his discipline and absolute loyalty to the president. Chavez saw in him someone who would never betray him and who would be willing to face any political battle on his behalf. In short time, Maduro became president of National Assembly. This position gave him even greater political visibility and solidified his image as a trusted figure within Chavismo. It became increasingly clear that he was not just another ally, but one of the pillars of the Bolivarian project. This close relationship with Chavez was crucial to his career. If it weren't for this direct connection with the most charismatic leader in Venezuela's recent history, Maduro would likely have remained a union leader or a minor congressman. But by fully aligning himself with Chavismo, he opened the door to the most important government positions and a rise that would change the course of his life and the country's. Minister and Chancellor. The year of 2006 marked a new chapter in Nicolás Maduro's life. Recognizing his loyalty and dedication to the movement, Hugo Chavez appointed him Minister of Foreign Affairs of Venezuela. It was a giant leap for someone who just a few years earlier was a bus driver. Suddenly, Maduro was representing Venezuela on the international stage, sitting at the table with heads of state and ministers from around the world. As foreign minister, Maduro faithfully followed Chavez's political line, strengthening relations with countries allied with socialism and maintaining distance
if not direct confrontation, with the United States. He strengthened ties with Cuba, deepened partnerships with Russia and China, and sought rapprochement with Middle Eastern countries, such as Iran. This strategy was part of the Chavista attempt to create an alternative power bloc capable of resisting North American influence. In his diplomatic career, Maduro became known for his firm tone, often echoing Chávez's anti-imperialist rhetoric. He defended Venezuela's sovereignty and harshly criticized Washington's political and economic interventions in Latin America. Although not considered a sophisticated diplomat, he was skilled at representing Chavismo clearly, conveying an image of continuity with the Bolivarian project. During this period, Maduro also strengthened his position internally. His position as foreign minister gave him experience in negotiations, frequent trips abroad, and high-level political contacts. Furthermore, he came to be seen within the PSUV, or United Socialist Party of Venezuela, as one of the figures closest to Chávez, always present at decisive moments and never questioning the president's orders. This phase also served to prepare Maduro for even greater heights. By dealing with foreign leaders, he learned to navigate the complex terrain of international politics. At the same time, it reinforced his image as a trusted figure within the Venezuelan government. Increasingly, it seemed he was being groomed for something greater, even if few believed he could one day succeed Chávez. His appointment as minister was undoubtedly a turning point in his career. From union leader to congressman, and from congressman to chancellor, Nicolás Maduro was no longer just a loyal activist. He was now a politician with global reach. This visibility would pave the way for the most unexpected and decisive moment of his life: Hugo Chávez's decision on who should inherit power if he did not survive the illness that struck him. The succession of Hugo Chávez. In 2011, Venezuela was shocked by the news that Hugo Chávez was ill. The president, once seen as a nearly invincible leader, revealed he was battling aggressive cancer. The illness deeply shook his supporters and created great uncertainty about the country's future. Chávez still tried to govern, but he spent increasing amounts of time in Cuba, where he received medical treatment. In this period of fragility, the question of succession became inevitable. Who could replace a leader as charismatic and popular as Chávez? Within Chavismo, there were stronger and more experienced names, such as Diosdado Cabello, but it was loyalty that prevailed. Among all the allies, one stood out for never having challenged or questioned the president, Nicolás Maduro. In December 2012, when his health was already critical, Chávez made a historic statement. He asked that if he could no longer remain in power, the people elect Nicolás Maduro as president. It was an unexpected gesture, as Maduro was not seen as the most prepared, but rather as the most trustworthy. The choice demonstrated that Chávez wanted to ensure the continuity of his Bolivarian revolution, even without him. After Chávez's death in March 2013, Maduro assumed the presidency on an interim basis. A few months later, he called presidential elections against the opposition candidate, Henrique Capriles. The result was close. Maduro won by a narrow margin, less than 2% of the vote. The opposition accused the government of fraud, and protests swept the country. But the new president consolidated his position with the support of the armed forces. The beginning of his administration was marked by attempts to keep Chávez's legacy alive. Maduro presented himself as the late leader's political son, repeating his speeches and even adopting similar expressions. However, he lacked the same charisma or communication skills, which soon drew criticism. The already fragile economy worsened month by month, and the new president's popularity rapidly declined. Even so, Maduro managed to maintain control of the country. He used his position as Chávez's heir to mobilize Chavismo's most loyal supporters and, over time, consolidated his image as a leader. However, Venezuela was entering one of the worst crises in its history, and his presidency would be marked by political repression, galloping inflation, and the beginning of a mass exodus of Venezuelans.
Dictatorship, crisis, and international pressures. Nicolás Maduro's government quickly descended into a period of turmoil and chaos. With the plummeting price of oil, Venezuela's main source of income, the country plunged into a severe economic crisis. Inflation soared to historic levels, reaching millions of percent annually at times, and food and medicine shortages became routine. Thousands of families became dependent on rationing programs or humanitarian aid. Faced with this scenario,
The opposition grew and organized massive demonstrations against the government. Maduro's response was harsh. Protests were violently repressed. Opposition leaders were arrested, and press freedom became increasingly restricted. Several international organizations denounced human rights violations, accusing his government of becoming a dictatorship. In this scenario, Maduro maintained his grip on power thanks to the support of the armed forces and the leadership of the Socialist Party. He also strengthened strategic international alliances, particularly with Cuba, Russia, and China, countries that offered political, economic, and military support. This network of allies allowed his government to survive even under severe diplomatic isolation from Western countries. In the United States and the European Union, sanctions against Maduro and his top ministers intensified. Asset freezes, economic blockades, and travel restrictions were imposed as a form of pressure. In 2020, the situation reached a new level. The U.S. Department of Justice accused Maduro of involvement in international drug trafficking and offered a $1 million reward for his capture. For Washington, the Venezuelan president was more than a dictator. He was also a criminal involved in illicit activities. Despite this siege, Maduro remains in power. His critics say he maintains his position through force, controlling institutions and repressing any sign of opposition. His supporters, however, claim he is resisting an imperialist siege and keeping Chávez's legacy alive. The reality, however, is that Venezuela has become the scene of one of the greatest humanitarian crises of the century, with millions of citizens leaving the country in search of better living conditions. Today, Nicolás Maduro is seen by much of the world as an isolated dictator, but still able to maintain control thanks to his military and international alliances. His figure represents, at the same time, the continuity of a political project initiated by Chávez and the personification of the failures that plunged Venezuela into misery, repression, and uncertainty.
Nicolás Maduro's trajectory is one of the most unlikely in world politics. From a young man without a solid academic background, a bus driver and union leader, he rose to the presidency of a strategic country like Venezuela. His life shows how loyalty, persistence, and a man of the people image can be more decisive in politics than diplomas or intellectual preparation. However, his rise also reveals the risks involved when loyalty to a leader replaces competence as a criterion for selection. While he is seen as a symbol of resistance against international pressure, he has also become the face of one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 21st century. Venezuela, once one of the richest nations in Latin America, thanks to its oil resources, now faces widespread poverty, runaway inflation,
and an exodus of millions of people seeking survival in other countries. This social and economic collapse is closely linked to the decisions and policies of its government. Nicolás Maduro's trajectory is one of the most unlikely in world politics. From a young man without a solid academic background, a bus driver and union leader, he rose to the presidency of a strategic country like Venezuela. His life shows how loyalty, persistence, and a man of the people image can be more decisive in politics than diplomas or intellectual preparation. However, his rise also reveals the risks involved when loyalty to a leader replaces competence as a criterion for selection. While he is seen as a symbol of resistance against international pressure, he has also become the face of one of the worst humanitarian crises of the 21st century. Venezuela, once one of the richest nations in Latin America thanks to its oil resources, now faces widespread poverty, runaway inflation, and an exodus of millions of people seeking survival in other countries. This social and economic collapse is closely linked to the decisions and policies of its government. Maduro has managed to remain in power because he learned to balance two forces. Internally, the support of the armed forces and the state apparatus. Externally, the support of strategic allies such as Russia, China, and Cuba. These two pillars have ensured his political survival even in the face of massive protests, international denunciations, and the United States offering a reward for his capture. However, Maduro's continued power does not mean stability. On the contrary, the country remains in constant tension with a population that no longer believes in promises of change and an international community that increasingly pressures him. His historical image is already etched. For many, he will be remembered as the man who deepened the Venezuelan crisis and transformed a democracy into a dictatorship and collective misery. The future will tell whether he will be remembered simply as a dictator or as the last chapter of an era marked by Chavismo.